What if the man who saved time once is the reason time is breaking now? From the very beginning of the multiverse saga, I kept feeling something was off. Too many timelines, too many variants, too many incursions happening randomly, yet somehow rhythmically. Chaos in stories is fine, but chaos in Marvel has always hidden design. When the announcement dropped that Robert Downey Jr. would return as Dr. Doom, most people saw shock value. I saw a pattern. Because Marvel doesn't bring back its most iconic face just for nostalgia. It does it when the universe itself needs symmetry. And the moment I started tracing that symmetry backwards, every path kept pointing to one person who wasn't even present anymore. Steve Rogers. But not the shield-holding soldier we remember. A Steve who stopped fighting on the battlefield and started moving pieces on a board nobody else could see. I started connecting the dots and realized the multiverse saga may not be about heroes reacting to chaos, but about one hero quietly allowing chaos to happen so a final correction becomes possible. To understand this, I went back to the quietest yet most suspicious moment in Endgame, Steve returning the Infinity Stones. Officially, he lives a full life with Peggy. Romantic ending. Closure. But multiverse logic destroys that idea instantly. If the frozen Steve wakes up in the future and another Steve lives continuously in the past, two prime versions exist in one reality. Marvel's time travel rules clearly warned this would fracture causality. Yet nothing exploded immediately. That's the key. Because incursions don't start loudly. They grow like hairline cracks in glass. A living paradox walking decades undetected would slowly destabilize the foundation of reality itself. Which means Steve didn't accidentally break time. He planted a long fuse. And I don't believe the most disciplined man in the MCU ignored a rule he himself fought to protect. The ending wasn't retirement. It was insertion. Steve didn't leave the timeline. He embedded himself into it deliberately, beginning a chain reaction that wouldn't peak for generations. Now here's where the theory gets darker. If two timelines overlapped long enough, the result wouldn't just be unstable history. It would produce an anomaly. Steve and Peggy having a child becomes catastrophic in multiversal physics. A person born from intersecting continuity carries contradictory origin points. Not a variant. Not a normal human. A living anchor connecting realities. I realized this child wouldn't just exist in time. Time would exist around them differently. Every decision they make subtly bends probability because their existence demands reconciliation between histories that should never coexist. In cosmic terms, they become an incursion trigger, not destroying worlds directly, but attracting collisions like gravity attracts matter. Steve, the man who values responsibility above all, would understand this risk better than anyone. Which means he knowingly chose to create the very anomaly that would eventually threaten existence. That sounds monstrous. Until you consider the possibility that he needed a guaranteed convergence point, a fixed star in chaos, to gather the entire multiverse into one solvable crisis. But Steve couldn't calculate something that big alone. That leads me to the Ancient One. When Bruce meets her, she instantly grasps branching consequences beyond mortal comprehension. People think she trusted blindly when promised the stones would return. I don't buy that. A sorcerer guarding reality for centuries wouldn't rely on hope. She must have looked forward, far beyond Thanos, and seen universes inevitably colliding. Not preventable, only manageable. So instead of stopping Steve, she allows the loop to exist because a paradox strong enough could eventually force all timelines into one confrontation point. She didn't save reality that day. She scheduled its breaking. And Steve, always the soldier following orders when they protect the greater good, accepted the mission. Stay in the past. Live the life. Create the anchor. Wait decades while fractures slowly spread. He wasn't rewarded with peace. He was assigned a silent watch, guarding a future war nobody else knew was coming. While that plan unfolds across time, another piece forms outside time: Loki. When Loki becomes the keeper of stories, he doesn't just rule timelines, he holds narrative gravity itself. Every branch now grows from his awareness. A man bound by duty and a god reborn through understanding suddenly share the same perspective. Infinite freedom creates infinite suffering. I started seeing how their ideologies align. Steve believes sacrifice saves the many. Loki learns purpose stabilizes chaos. Together, they would reach the same terrifying conclusion. The multiverse cannot be permanently stabilized while infinite possibilities continue expanding. It must collapse into a single reconciled existence. But heroes cannot destroy hope openly. So they allow events to escalate naturally. Incursions increase. Kang variants die out. Chaos rises. They are not failing to stop disaster. They are guiding disaster toward a controlled endpoint where rebuilding becomes mathematically possible instead of endlessly postponed. And that endpoint requires a force willing to impose absolute structure: Dr. Doom. A genius tyrant is necessary because heroes won't unite existence through fear, but fear will unite existence under a ruler. Doom views multiverse freedom as disease. Steve, after witnessing endless cycles of war, would reluctantly agree that infinite branching guarantees infinite tragedy. So instead of preventing Doom's rise, he permits it. Not alliance, not betrayal. Strategic inevitability. I see Steve recognizing that only a dictator strong enough to overwrite realities could compress infinite worlds into one battle world. He sacrifices morality for survival, letting humanity experience temporary oppression so existence itself can endure. Just like sacrificing a city to save a planet, but on a cosmic scale. From the outside, Steve disappears from history. From the inside, he becomes the architect of circumstances that make Doom unavoidable. He doesn't crown Doom King. He clears every obstacle that would have stopped him. The cruelest piece of this plan is personal. Doom needs a power source linking realities, and the anomaly child becomes that beacon. Steve understands this long before it happens. He raises a family knowing they are part of a trap designed for a god king. That sounds unforgivable, yet consistent with a soldier who once crashed a plane to save millions. Only now the stakes are universes. I think Steve believes temporary suffering of one life, even his own blood, outweighs eternal collapse of all realities. He allows Doom to discover the anomaly because that discovery triggers the creation of Battleworld, the patchwork planet where fragments of every universe merge. Only there can all contradictions physically coexist long enough for a final rewrite. Steve doesn't want Doom to win. He wants Doom to gather everything in one place. A battlefield where existence itself stands within reach of change. Once Battleworld exists, Steve's role transforms. The mastermind steps into the light again. Seeing lives stripped of freedom awakens the Captain America within him. The man who allowed tyranny now opposes it, not because the plan failed, but because its next phase begins. He gathers survivors from broken realities, heroes who remember what freedom felt like. This war isn't about defeating Doom physically. It's ideological. Doom represents stability through control. Steve represents stability through choice. The universe must decide which principle defines the new reality. By challenging Doom at the height of his power, Steve ensures the final universe forms not from domination, but from sacrifice acknowledged by all. The people must witness both extremes before balance becomes accepted. Only then can a rewritten timeline avoid repeating endless cycles of expansion and collapse. In this interpretation, the coming doomsday isn't the climax, it's the confession. Every incursion, every broken timeline, every disappearance of Kang leads to a single revelation. The multiverse didn't spiral into crisis accidentally. It was shepherded there. Loki holds the threads. Steve positions the board. Doom compresses the pieces. And Secret Wars becomes less a battle and more a cosmic referendum on existence itself. I break this down as the ultimate evolution of Steve Rogers, a hero willing to let himself be remembered as the man who caused chaos. So nobody remembers the chaos that came before creation stabilized. History will call him absent. Reality will exist because of him. When the dust settles and a new universe stands stable, people will celebrate heroes who fought in the final battle. They won't know the war began decades earlier when an old soldier chose to stay in the past. They won't know he engineered his own moral downfall so hope could permanently survive. The greatest sacrifice isn't dying for the world. It's living long enough to let the world hate you so it can live safely afterward. And that's why I think the multiverse saga ends not with a victory pose, but with quiet absence. No statues. No legends. Just one man erased from memory because the perfect timeline has no place for the one who broke it to save it. There's a rumor floating around right now that sounds almost too wild to be real. And yet the more you sit with it, the more it starts to feel dangerously plausible. The idea is simple on the surface. Steve Rogers never really disappeared at the end of Endgame. He didn't just retire quietly in the past and fade into history. According to this rumor, he was hiding out in Earth 828 the entire time. And if that's true, it changes everything we thought we understood about the future of the MCU. Because this isn't just about Steve growing old. It's about timing. It's about why certain characters appear when they do. And it's about how the Fantastic Four, Doctor Doom, and Captain America might be connected in a way Marvel hasn't told us yet. When you start lining up the details, suddenly moments that felt like background flavor start looking like deliberate setups. A figure on a TV screen. A child standing next to him. A future version of Steve Rogers that hasn't been explained yet. These aren't random choices. They feel intentional. Planted quietly, waiting for the right story to activate them. And that's where this theory gets really interesting. Because if Steve Rogers was in 828, and if Doom and the Fantastic Four know it, then the question isn't whether he comes back. The question is why he's needed now, and what he represents to a universe that no longer fully trusts its heroes anymore. According to what's been circulating, the idea is that Doctor Doom and the Fantastic Four eventually track down Steve Rogers in Earth 828 and bring him to Earth 616. Not as a fighter, not as a soldier, but as proof. Proof that they're not enemies. Proof that they can be trusted. The rumor specifically says they need Steve to convince the people of 616 that they're friendly, quote unquote. And that phrasing matters, because it implies skepticism. It implies fear. It implies that when the Fantastic Four arrive, the world doesn't welcome them with open arms. Instead, they're met with doubt. And who better to vouch for them than Steve Rogers? Steve isn't just a hero. He's a moral symbol. In the MCU, he represents integrity in its purest form. If Steve stands next to you, the world listens. So the idea that Doom would use that, or at least understand the value of that, says a lot about how dangerous the situation might be. This isn't about introductions. It's about survival. It's about crossing universes at a time when trust is fragile and reality itself feels unstable. And it also suggests something else. That Steve didn't just choose a quiet life. He was positioned somewhere specific, in a universe that would eventually matter. Earth 828 isn't a retirement home. It might be a holding place, waiting for the moment Steve Rogers becomes necessary again. Now think back to that moment during Fantastic Four. It's brief, easy to overlook. We're watching the team on television, framed like public figures, almost like celebrities. And in that scene, we get a glimpse of a man and a child watching along. It's not lingered on. There's no dialogue drawing attention to them, but they're there. And Marvel doesn't place random faces in moments like that without a reason. At the time, it felt like world building. Just everyday people reacting to extraordinary events. But what if it wasn't just that? What if that man wasn't just any civilian? What if that was Steve Rogers? Older, quieter, deliberately kept in the background. When you reframe the scene with that possibility, it changes the tone completely. Suddenly, it's not a passive moment. It's observational. Steve watching a world he's no longer part of. Watching new heroes rise while he stays hidden. And the child next to him. That's where things get really interesting. Because we've never been shown Steve as a father. We've never explored that chapter of his life. But the Endgame ending opened that door. It told us he lived, loved, built a family. It just never showed us how that life unfolded. That Fantastic Four scene might be the first quiet confirmation that it did. Here's where the timeline starts to line up in a way that feels almost unsettling. We've heard that in Doomsday, we're getting a flash-forward version of Steve Rogers. 10 to 15 years later, longer hair, the Nomad look. A man who's aged not just physically, but emotionally. This isn't the clean-cut Captain America we remember. This is someone who's been off the board for a long time. Someone who's seen things change without him. Now ask yourself this. If Steve went back, spent time with Peggy, and had a child, that child wouldn't be a baby forever. Time would keep moving. So what if the Fantastic Four TV moment takes place in the middle of that timeline? Not right after Steve goes back. Not at the end. But somewhere in between. The child is young, but old enough to understand what he's watching. Old enough to sit next to his father and witness history unfold again. Then by the time we reach Doomsday, that child is older. Maybe even grown. And Steve. He's changed too. The Nomad look isn't just aesthetic. It represents disconnection. A man without a flag. Without a country. Without a clear place in the world anymore. If that's the case, then those earlier scenes aren't just Easter eggs. They're emotional groundwork. They're showing us what Steve had to lose before he was pulled back in. And this is where Earth 828 becomes more than just a number. If Steve was hiding there, it means that universe wasn't random. It was chosen. Or maybe it was the only place where he could live without disrupting the sacred timeline. A universe close enough to feel familiar, but distant enough to stay untouched. That would explain why Doom and the Fantastic Four know where to find him. Because if anyone understands universes, it's them. Doom especially. He wouldn't see Steve as a retired hero. He'd see him as a variable. A constant across realities. Someone whose presence carries weight no matter where he goes. And that makes Steve incredibly valuable. Not because of his strength, but because of what he represents to people. To governments. To heroes who've lost their way. Bringing Steve into 616 wouldn't just calm fears. It would anchor reality. It would remind people of what heroism is supposed to look like. And that might be exactly what Doom needs. Or what he wants people to believe he needs. Because Doom doesn't do anything without layers. If he's involved in retrieving Steve Rogers, it's not altruistic. It's strategic. Steve's return would shift the balance of trust instantly. And that's a powerful tool in the wrong hands. What makes this theory even more compelling is how quietly it fits into what Marvel has been doing lately. The MCU has moved away from clean endings. Heroes don't just retire and stay retired. Stories echo. Choices come back around. Steve choosing a life with Peggy was framed as closure, but it may have also been a setup. A way to move him off the main board while still keeping him accessible. Because of Steve Rogers, who's lived a full life, who's raised a child, who's watched the world move on without him. That's a very different character than the soldier who crashed into the ice. That Steve has perspective. He has doubt. He has something to protect beyond ideals. And that makes his eventual return heavier, more complicated. If the Fantastic Four need him to vouch for them, it puts Steve in an impossible position. Step back into the spotlight and risk everything he's built. Or stay hidden and let a fragile universe tear itself apart. That's not a physical conflict. It's a moral one. And those are the stories Steve Rogers has always been at the center of. The rumor doesn't just bring him back. It gives him a reason that feels earned, a reason rooted in consequence, not nostalgia. The child element is really the emotional core of this entire idea. Because once you accept that Steve has a son, everything shifts. Suddenly, his absence from major events isn't just narrative convenience. It's protection. He stayed out of conflicts because he didn't want that life for his family. He didn't want his child growing up in the shadow of Captain America. That makes the idea of him watching the Fantastic Four on television even more poignant. He's not involved. He's not intervening. He's just observing, like a civilian, like a father. And that's something we've never really seen from him before. Then imagine Doomsday. Imagine that same child, older now, seeing his father pulled back into something dangerous. That adds stakes. Marvel hasn't really tapped into yet with Steve. This isn't about saving the world for principle alone. It's about legacy, about what kind of future he's leaving behind. The Nomad look fits perfectly into that. Nomad was always about Steve questioning systems, walking away from institutions that no longer reflected his values. A Steve who becomes Nomad after living a full family life isn't rejecting the world. He's being dragged back into it. And that tension is rich. It's human. It's exactly the kind of layered storytelling Marvel has been setting up quietly in the background. If you step back and look at the structure, it almost feels like Marvel has been hiding Steve in plain sight. Not through dialogue, not through big reveals, but through framing, through implication, through moments that feel insignificant until you rewatch them with new information. That Fantastic Four scene doesn't scream importance, it whispers it. And that's usually where Marvel's biggest long-term plans live. The rumor about Doom and the Fantastic Four needing Steve isn't just a cool crossover idea. It solves a narrative problem. How do you introduce powerful, unknown figures into a world that's already been burned by gods and aliens? You bring someone everyone trusts, someone who represents stability. And if that person has been quietly living in another universe, watching from the sidelines, then his return isn't fan service. It's escalation. It means the situation is serious enough to break his promise to stay out. And once that line is crossed, there's no going back. Steve Rogers stepping into 616 again would signal that whatever is coming next isn't something the current heroes can handle alone. It's a line in the sand, a warning, and maybe a final stand. What really sells this theory is how emotionally restrained it is. There's no spectacle baked into it. No big action hook. It's about presence, about recognition, about what happens when the symbol of heroism returns older, quieter, and carrying the weight of an entire life we haven't seen. The long hair, the nomad look, the absence of the shield. These details aren't cosmetic. They tell a story before he ever speaks. They tell us he's been through something real, something personal. And if Doom is the one orchestrating his return, that adds an unsettling edge. Because Doom respects strength, but he also respects symbols. He understands perception better than most villains ever have. Using Steve to soften the arrival of the Fantastic Four is brilliant and terrifying. Because once Steve lends his credibility, the world lowers its guard. And Doom thrives when people underestimate him. That doesn't mean Steve is being manipulated easily. But it does mean he's stepping into a game where every move has consequences far beyond himself. And that's where the tragedy of it lies. He earned his peace. He earned his quiet life. And yet the universe might not be done asking things from him. So when you look back at that simple idea, Steve Rogers hiding out in Earth 828, it stops sounding random. It starts sounding planned, carefully placed, a long game move that only pays off once enough pieces are on the board. The Fantastic Four, Dr. Doom, a fractured multiverse, a world struggling to define what heroism even means anymore. Steve's return wouldn't just be nostalgic. It would be confrontational. It would force the MCU to ask whether symbols can still save us, or if they're just reminders of a simpler time that no longer exists. And maybe that's the point. Maybe Steve isn't coming back to fix everything. Maybe he's coming back to witness the end of something, and the beginning of something else entirely. Because a Steve who's lived, loved, and lost his anonymity can't be Captain America the same way again. He can only be Steve Rogers. And that might be exactly what the universe needs right now, or exactly what finally breaks him. And if that child we glimpsed really is his son, then the story isn't just about universes colliding. It's about inheritance, about what gets passed down when legends finally step aside. So the real question isn't whether this rumor is true, it's what happens if it is. Steve Rogers did a biggest mistake in Endgame. That's why Dr. Doom is created and Doom Direct hunts Steve's family. Welcome back to MovieCast. I'm your host Liam Harrison, and today we're diving into a theory so dark, so unsettling, that it changes how you'll forever see Avengers Endgame. This isn't just a movie breakdown. This is a slow burn revelation about cause and consequence, love and sacrifice, and how one peaceful decision may have shattered reality itself. Everyone remembers Endgame as the perfect farewell. The story where Captain America finally got the life he deserved. But stories aren't just about endings, they're about ripples. And some ripples grow into tidal waves. Tonight, we peel back the layers of that final scene, not to disrespect it, but to understand its true cost. Because when Steve Rogers chose happiness, the multiverse quietly began to bleed. That final image of Steve Rogers dancing with Peggy Carter feels like closure. Soft lighting, gentle music, two souls reclaiming lost time. It's framed as a reward, a cosmic apology for decades of sacrifice. Steve didn't ask for glory, riches, or power. He asked for a life, and the universe seemed to say yes. But Marvel has always been careful with time. Endgame itself spends nearly an hour explaining that you cannot change the past without consequences. The Ancient One warns Banner. Hulk explains branching timelines. Tony Stark builds an entire system to avoid paradoxes. And yet Steve's ending casually ignores the very rules the film fought so hard to establish. That's not an accident. That's a clue. Because Steve didn't return to his own past. He created a new one. A separate living, breathing timeline where history was never meant to unfold that way. The smile on that bench hides a truth the MCU hasn't confronted yet. Peace, achieved through broken laws, is never free. Here's where the logic becomes terrifyingly precise. When Steve travels back to the 1940s, there is already a Steve Rogers frozen in ice. That alone confirms this is not a closed time loop. It's a hard branch, a completely separate reality. In this new timeline, Peggy Carter lives an entirely different life. Howard Stark interacts with a future man decades early. Even small choices, conversations, silences, knowledge withheld compound over time. Steve doesn't just marry Peggy. He exists. He influences. He alters. And unlike the Avengers' quick heists, Steve stays. He lets the branch grow unchecked for decades. This isn't a minor Nexus event. It's a sustained fracture. The kind the TVA once pruned without hesitation. The kind that destabilizes the multiversal equation. Steve didn't just retire. He became an anomaly that aged in real time, carrying future knowledge inside a past that wasn't ready for it. Marvel later teaches us what happens when universes drift too far from their natural course. Loki shows timelines branching uncontrollably once the sacred timeline collapses. Doctor Strange, in the multiverse of madness, introduces incursions, cosmic collisions where two universes destroy each other because they've been pulled too close. These aren't random disasters. They're symptoms, reactions to imbalance. An imbalance always starts somewhere. Steve's branch isn't pruned. It's allowed to exist. It grows older, heavier, more unstable. Every year Steve spends with Peggy is another year that universe moves further from its original destiny. Eventually, it begins to overlap with others. Reality strains. The multiverse doesn't collapse overnight. It cracks slowly, quietly, while heroes celebrate happy endings elsewhere. This reframes Kang entirely. Kang wasn't a tyrant obsessed with control for no reason. He was a reaction, a symptom of a multiverse already broken. Variants only exist because branching became uncontrollable. And what accelerated that chaos? Not Loki alone, not Strange alone, but a foundational sin allowing personal desire to override cosmic balance. Steve Rogers, the man defined by doing what's right no matter the cost, unknowingly made the most human choice imaginable. And that's what makes it tragic. He didn't act out of ego or malice. He acted out of love. But love in the MCU has always been dangerous. Wanda broke reality for her children. Peter Parker erased memories for MJ. And Steve rewrote time for Peggy. Each act begins with pain and ends with catastrophe. Now enter Dr. Doom, not as a cackling villain, but as something far more unsettling, a realist. Doom doesn't see himself as evil. He sees himself as necessary. In his eyes, the multiverse isn't a place of wonder. It's a system on the brink of collapse. Infinite realities cannot coexist without structure. Chaos breeds suffering. Doom believes order is mercy. And when he looks across the multiverse, searching for the original fracture point, one anomaly stands out. A man who lived twice. A hero who existed where he shouldn't. A timeline that should have been pruned but wasn't. Doom doesn't hunt Steve Rogers out of revenge. He targets him because every equation leads back to that choice on the dance floor. To Doom, Steve Rogers is not Captain America. He's Patient Zero. The first uncontained variable. The proof that even the purest intentions can doom existence. Doom understands something the Avengers still refuse to accept. You cannot save everyone. You must choose what survives. And in Doom's calculation, a single man's happiness is not worth infinite universes dying in silence. This is where the moral conflict sharpens. Doom isn't wrong. He's horrifyingly logical. If removing Steve or collapsing his branched universe can stabilize reality, then isn't that the heroic choice? Isn't that what the Avengers have done before on smaller scales? Sacrifice one to save billions? The difference now is emotional. This time, the sacrifice is someone we love. Tony Stark warned us. When you mess with time, it tends to mess back. That wasn't just foreshadowing. It was prophecy. Tony paid the ultimate price to correct a mistake. Natasha did too. Even Loki dies repeatedly across timelines. Balance is always restored through loss. Steve was the exception, the one who walked away whole. And the universe doesn't allow exceptions. That bench scene isn't peace. It's borrowed time. Steve's return as an old man passing the shield isn't closure. It's a handoff before judgment. The shield moves forward because the past is about to be erased. Doom doesn't want Captain America dead. He wants the mistake undone. And undoing it may require something worse than death, erasing the life Steve fought so hard to live. This sets the stage for Avengers Doomsday and Secret Wars not as simple hero versus villain stories, but as philosophical wars. Is free will worth universal collapse? Does intent matter more than outcome? Can a hero be guilty without being evil? The Avengers will fight Doom because that's what they do. But deep down, they'll realize the truth is fractured. Steve Rogers didn't mean to break the multiverse, but he did. And Dr. Doom isn't trying to rule everything. He's trying to stop the bleeding. The most chilling possibility isn't that Doom wins, it's that he's right. So when the multiverse finally collides, when realities fold in on themselves, when incursions consume entire worlds, remember where it started. Not with a conqueror, not with a god, but with a dance, a quiet choice. A man who wanted one life after saving everyone else. Steve Rogers is the cause. Dr. Doom is the cure. And the Avengers will have to decide which truth they can live with. If you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to MovieCast for more theories that change how you see movies forever. I'm Liam Harrison, and I'll see you in the next one.